And oh, I like that. It's so official recording.
I realized I hadn't pressed the final button. Sorry.
I love that. You know, when I was updating my CV, I, you know, was writing down people I noticed wrote their MFA, the title of their dissertation and stuff. And no one really wrote anything for their, you know, like their BA, because most people didn't have like a thesis. But I was like, I do. I was like, I have my senior project and it has a title and it is my first book. And so I added that line to it. And I was like, in an empty house. Like I was like, stories. And so it was really special to be like, you know, this was my senior project, was my first book. And it's just like been a journey, but I loved working on it. It's just, I just love, I mean, I don't know where it is. I'm not gonna lie. I have no idea. Like, it doesn't exist to me, like on any sort of like, my computer like died, of course, is all like, you know, laptops, you know, go off into the world and, you know, disappear into the ether. But I still remember the stories very distinctly. So hopefully that answers your question, but I'm just thinking of everyone working on their senior projects, and it's just, this is the first book, and it will always be in my heart, you know, till I'm like 90 years old. It's, you know, that first book. So thank you, Susan, for that.
That's great.
Turn.
So now that we're recording this, and I realize that the biggest mistake I made in the introductions is when I said thank you for the faculty to be here, and I didn't acknowledge Jenny Zhu, my new colleague at Bard here, who we're so thrilled to have, that she's the one who made our connection to Jane. So not only am I thrilled you're here, but I can't be more grateful that you made this connection. So thank you. My apologies that as I was going around the little Zoom room, the person I really wanted to thank, I forgot to thank. Okay, so Jane, would you read to us, please?
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of, you know, like when we're little kids, like, please read a story. You know, I was actually just nowadays when I'm in, you know, bookstores, and, you know, it's like, you know, going to bookstores during COVID, I'm always like, you know, thinking I have to get in and get out if I need something. And the weird thing, I've been obsessed with buying children's books. Like there's just something about, there's one called Pugtato. I highly recommend Pugtato. It's like a pug and a potato. Anyway, I'm going off topic. Yes, I'd love to read some poems to you all. And I'm going to start off actually with, because I think it's really important for me, you know, during this time to recognize how vulnerable sharing is, you know, and especially like if anyone's writing right now, it's a hard time to write. And so I'm going to just start with like brand new poems that I wrote, you know, in the past couple weeks and months, and I haven't been writing a lot. So I'll start with that and then move into some other poems. And I can't wait to hear your questions and your thoughts, and feel free to, you know, type in the chat and say hi too. I like the kind of mixture of that in Zoom world. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to start off by reading a poem that, again, is very, very new. And I was returning during COVID. I've been returning to poets I haven't read in a while. And I returned to Sharon Olds. And there's a Sharon Olds poem called First Hour, in which she envisions the first hour of her life, like right when you're born, that first hour. So I kind of wrote a poem after Sharon Olds called First Hour. First hour. That first hour, I did not blink. Came out with fists curled like an armadillo. I breathed in, out, in and away from hospital lights too flickering for my own tongue. Born with a shock of black hair, strands spooling out story after story. Blood billowing at my sides, slime circumferencing my eyes, crusting like good bread. I loved so hard then, and was so loved. My mother's breast, all fractals of cold air. My father, not there. The men who had sliced light bulbs cleanly in half, throat in their glowing palms not. Can't you see? I loved so hard. In this first hour, in this tenuous time between living and more living. So I'm always trying to get back to like, like baby Jane, like my baby self, lately. I don't know why. She's like trying to talk to me. I'll just read a few more new ones. The next new one I'm going to be reading. I don't have a bathtub where I currently live, and like a bathtub is like central to like just clearing my mind in the winter. And so my partner actually bought me an inflatable bathtub, which for those of you who, I mean, Google it if you want to, but it's an adult kiddie pool. So like it's tiny. I just like curl in there, but it's literally changed my life. I love this inflatable bathtub. It's absolutely ridiculous. So here's a poem, which is called In the Inflatable Bath. Tea leaf steeped, I spill out on all sides, hunched in my own oil slick, slewing skin and soap water taffy. Earlier on the drive to the coast, cars kept pulling over, hazards on, to see what? Hawks diving silent staccatos in rotting cabbage fields. Frog or steam misting among fronds or dead mice, I still can't tell. But all that standing water, all that fungal grief rising. This last year up to the ribboned neck. I sit in the bath, knees a wobbly saucer for my chin. An inflatable bath, a puffed up ramekin in a tiny shower, a kiddie pool I tuck and roll and flap in. How stupid, I know. This plastic cauldron of sweltering self-care, or so I was told. To linger in salt, to melt mindfully, to become all lobster-legged, all mop-knot muscle, foaming lavender sans rabid raccoon froth. My lungs heaving a year's worry, dredged lake and all its rusted iron among my clavicle. To see what? To heal how? I count myself bone by bone here. Because I am my mother's daughter, I think about how to save this bathwater, maybe for washing delicates, to wear oneself lovely. Is this what self-care means? Your own warmth among silk laced before the news headlines. And so those are some new ones. And I was gonna switch gears and maybe read some other work. I have been thinking a lot lately about labor. And I mean, it's always on my mind of sorts, but my mom is a postal worker and she works night shift and she has been doing so for many years. And I remember when, lockdown happened and I was thinking a lot about, the privilege of my education and the privilege of working from home and teaching from home, and that my mom as a essential worker, like just, sorting mail, like the mail right now, like everything, is so dependent on the USPS. And from the time we were kind of going, like thinking about kind of ballots, right? Thinking about medicine, thinking about stimulus checks, thinking about it all. And I'm just such a proud daughter of a USPS postal worker. And I'm a restaurant baby. I grew up in a restaurant. My whole, my family are all restaurant workers. And it's just been a time of really understanding, thinking about labor. So I wanted to read this, and I'm going to say thank you ahead of time because it is a long poem, and I'll just maybe pause there and just offer some time for Q&A, and maybe I can read again. But I needed this to be a long poem because labor is long and those hours are long, and you don't get your 15-minute break until they tell you to. So just a lot of gratitude ahead for listening to this poem on labor. And I don't know if, let me see if I can, maybe I can screen share. Maybe I can show it to you maybe. Is that possible? I think it should be. Maybe not, but that's okay. Maybe it is.
I just made you a co-host, and so you should be able
Oh,
to share your screen. Yes. Now.
okay. Thanks so much, Susan. I'm just taking this off the website. So, but I just want you just to briefly see the form of it, which is really dense. As you can see, it's meant to be super like dense and kind of like, I don't know, it just feels like it's kind of like a giant block of spam. Like it's just going to be something that sits heavy in you and it's very, very long. So just wanted to see, for you to see the form. The other thing, as I read it, I've actually reworked this poem in so many different ways. I've actually cut out words in like rice paper, some of these lines in rice paper, and I have folded them into dumplings that I've eaten. So I just think of it as a poem that's like continually with me and changing. And I actually thought this poem's so dense, I cut out every single line into tiny little strips, and I folded them kind of like a little dumpling of sorts, and I fluffed them up. So it became like a poem, like that was a bunch of scraps of paper to give it some air. So I just highly recommend for any of you who are like writing right now on, your project. And so much of it is like, okay, I'm on the laptop, I'm kind of like writing something physically there, to kind of get also like maybe print it if you can, or think about reworking it into something like book arts too, because it really changed. To eat my own poem was so cool. I'll just say that. It's just like, that's cool. So okay, here it is. This is The Long Labors. And yeah, I welcome thoughts and questions afterwards, and here goes. The Long Labors. My grandmother said it was going to be as long as you hold your lineage, depending on how long you can hold your tongue, as long as your tongue can wrap around this pit of some stolen stone fruit, as long as you can hide your pitter-patter face, glued in sun-split splinters, lengthening shadows, as long as your face longing to be married back to your daughter, your mother, your grandmother, freckle by freckle, furnished forever across the long, loaming hall. Collapsed in a pool of spit, my mouth over papers, raccoon doctorate, luxurious loser with thin branch fingers, no meat in the palm, no muscle in the bending. The farmer in me is atrophying. The cook, the factory seamstress, the clerk, the mother in me is pulling out. All that I come from, all that I owe to them, what is left of me? What is me? Professorial rat, book leavened and maddened in meetings, chewing at my desk on a frozen anything. Microwave spun and splattered on lessons, wondering who packaged this, who spooned this glacial sauce into this plastic hull, whose hands, whose daughter, does she look like me, does she like dancing in the gloaming, funneled in my greedy mouth, I, daughter of long labors, I, knock off half-price guilt, I, impossible imposter, big words, trying to prove what and to whom. I wait to be seated at a restaurant, a white person enters and orders from me, I want sweet and sour chicken, but without bell peppers and brown rice, and I almost take the order down. In the 12th hour of night shift overtime, my mother gobbles the air of the facility, her mouth opening a cavern or a bowhead whale or a sinkhole, gobbling up its oxygen, its nitrogen, its argon, its skin, its hair dust, its swirling smog, collecting time, collecting benefits. Her eyes so baggy, they carry a leaking pack of chicken breasts. She had planned to cook tonight for us, but look at the break room clock. She is out of time now, and they will surely go bad. What a waste at $1.50 a pound. She returns to her station, rubs tiger balm and lavender oil along her wrists, chews dried ginger to keep awake, the root of herself sharpening, salivating. Reapplies pink lipstick, swivels the tube upward, rituals of resilience, feeds letters to machines, churning intestinal noise, electricity bills and love letters and baby photos and magazines from ladies who lunch, who will take them to the salon, and credit card limited time offers, and those reminders from the dentist, and supermarket weeklies, and postcards from Oahu. Can't you believe how blue the water is? How restful, how peaceful? Make sure to bring the whole family next time. Ginger chew, ginger chew. Who made this for you? Do you know the song that reminds them of home? Do you know how to play the radio as loud as you can and roll down the windows and smack your cheeks 10 times in order to stay awake for the drive? Do you know who sewed on this button for you? Do you know the murmuring leg ache from standing all day, a tree for whom? Do you know who processed the letter you received today, fed it into a machine with paper cuts as wide as a river you can float in? Do you know how long you can hold until your 15-minute break? The roiling pressure in the abdomen, the tick-tap of the feet and the hands, how much to tip the gas station in Jersey, how the smell sticks behind both earlobes, the temperature when flipping a walk, the oil burning the white paper hat measuring salt to the brim, how your impatient face resembles a slowly rotting peach, worms in the snarl. Do you know the name of your fishmonger? The name of my uncle, the times he snuck in a call to say he will be late picking up his daughter, fish scales glittered to his elbows like opera gloves. Do you know cuticles peeling white like flecks of cod after washing dishes? Do you know the smell of nail polish remover, stinging bees in your nostril? Do you know the back, how the back curls, how the back bridges, how the back puckers and crunches like packed snow no one else but you will shovel out? I look up how labor is used in a sentence. The obvious labor. Immigrants provided the source of cheap labor. Negotiations between labor and management. Wants to vote a labor in the elections. The flood destroyed the labor of years. Industry needs labor for protection. Anthropomorphine, app capitalism, gentrification. What do these words mean and to whom? Helping my mother over the sink, I snip the ends of long beans with kitchen shears, the ends rolling away, green lizard tails. I cut away each word like a long bean, gentrific, gloving the G down the drain. If only lying on the beach, limbs loosened like an old garden hose. If only watching the movements of our stomachs rising and falling like baby jellyfish, our thighs waxing and waning in bristle rough sand. If only reading a book, the pages wrinkled and curled like a snail shell from falling asleep against our faces. If only devouring a cloud full of no rain, no metallic muscle. If only softness, if only we went into the softness, into the downy abyss. What is this word vacation? My grandmother asks me, chilly hitting the walk like delicious dying stars. My grandmother said it was going to be long. Going out the door, always late for work, shirt inside out, said, go on and bounce a howling baby. My mother met and me while skimming oxtail broth, the fat sheen of look how well we eat in this country. Lest you forget it was worth it. Lest you forget the dilation of the cervix going, the contractions going, the grip, the placenta, the shit, the vernix, the garbled life going, the soft flashlight eyes, the milk, the teeth, the hands on heart, the soup, I've always just like, oh, this poem is so exhausting. The soup coagulating on the stove, you must go, for what gleams in the dark turns to look at you. Remember this, the work and the after work and the work of being perceived as not doing enough work. Though you're working well enough, will this ever be enough? When is enough enough? The chorus now, not until the knots of fat melt in this walk, not until you have nothing left but this suet, this smear of high heat lineage gleaming in the gloaming, and it is yours and it is mine and it is your dream daughter's, and it will last longer than you will ever believe. Believe us. Whew. I'm going to drink water now. Oh, that poem is always like, I like reading out loud, but then I hit a certain point where I'm like, I just kind of need to like fall over. And I think I wanted that feeling of like when you're reading this, just be like, I'm so tired. So thank you all for listening to that long poem. I appreciate it. And yeah, I'm excited to hear any thoughts or questions. Yeah.
At the moment, people are saying things like, thank you for that reading, and that was stunning, and it was stunning. So I would love for a student to ask a question, but as you pull together your ideas, I'm curious about the food and sort of this, food being a shared human experience, right? There's a lot of eating in this and food, and everything from the white person who comes in and gives their order and 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 this idea of that's something that we all share. And I think I read this in your other poetry, and so sort of this sense of shared, and then what's particular to the Asian American experience that is as you phrase it so beautifully in this show that you had at the Fry Museum, which I hope you will read that poem as well, is the haunting of the past and sort of the social, historical, and political contexts that are haunting the Asian American experience, especially for poets, right? And so that there's a particularity to that, and then there's obviously the shared experience as well. And just, if you could just talk to those two things, sort of that those two things can coexist, but there's also a kind of almost dissonance in that, right?
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Susan. Yeah, I can't escape kind of thinking about nourishment in particular, which is maybe a word I would use tied to thinking about food and what that means in terms of food as something that connects us together. Like as I mentioned, I grew up in a Chinese American restaurant, and in many ways, growing up as a restaurant baby, I think I became a writer mostly because my mom just dropped me off at the public library across the street because it was free babysitting. So I just read, and I didn't have anything else to do except read and eat. Like it was just like this thing, and do chores at the restaurant. But I was thinking a lot about kind of community in relationship to kind of food. And recently I did a reading with a bunch of Asian American poets and writers for a Lunar New Year, and it was a hot pot edition reading. So everyone actually on Zoom had like boiling pots of hot pot, and there was a constant reminder, please be mindful of your technology in relationship to the boiling pot. And it was the most glorious connection, because it was like, oh, like you get to see, you actually, it was kind of ASMR because it was like you can hear the boiling while people were reading. And there's something about food that is so tied to memory to me, and so tied to community. And in many ways it's a way of saying I love you when you can't say that. And I think about the times that my mother and my grandmother would take the time to peel the skin off grapes, and wordlessly, it's like to say I love you, though we never really say that out loud. And there's something about that. And in my own family's history, and I think that Asian America is large. Like there's so many disparate, very distinct histories tied to all of kind of our heritage. And in many ways, our countries have been at like our motherland countries have been at war with each other. And so I feel like I can only speak to my own kind of background as someone who's Chinese American in particular, but my grandparents grew up during the kind of the Great Leap Forward, and my mother was born at the very beginning of the Cultural Revolution. And I cannot separate my obsession with food from starvation and a history of starvation. That was only one it's not that long ago, right? You're thinking about 1958, 1960s, just like, really kind of thinking through what does it mean to kind of know that like I couldn't, leave a plate unfinished. I can't, I still have problems throwing away rotting cilantro in my fridge. Like I'm just like, that thing way back in your fridge, you're just like, just gonna leave it there for a little longer, because to me it had like a life force still. Like I felt so ashamed that I did not finish the cilantro. And so yeah, the poem that after preparing the altar the ghost feast feverishly, I wrote that poem. It's the last poem to my second book that's coming out, and I reimagined it in an art installation where the poem is in bowls actually, and you have to walk around the table to read the poem. And so you kind of have to read the poem over and over again, which is really kind of cool. But in that poem, I was thinking a lot about my family members who died, who starved during the Great Leap Forward. My grandfather was the sole survivor in his family. And I think about, my family that didn't necessarily have enough to eat. And it was like, I knew that my ghost had to speak at some point, or had to like eat. And this poem came out in 1 hour, even though I've been thinking about this poem for 2 years, and more than that, honestly. And it was a poem that was like they were just having a giant feast. That's basically what happened. is that they just start eating everything, including like flip-flops and pizza. And so yeah, I thank you for that question. I'm obsessed with food. I'm obsessed with poetry. I'm teaching a food writing class like literally this week. So this whole quarter. So I'm at Western. So I'm excited about all of that in relation. So I don't know if that was a way to answer that question, but thank you, Susan, for that. And I'm happy to read that poem at any point too. So just let me know.
So we do have a question here. Michael, you could ask it directly if you wanted to, or I can read this, but.
No, I'll ask it directly.
Thank you.
That was an incredible experience hearing that reading. That was just beautiful.
That was incredible. Yes.
I asked, Jesus, maybe I should just read it. Oh, it's just funny to read it. Could Jane talk about how she arrives at a decision to collapse lines of poetry into prose? Does she reach a tipping point or a particular density of texture that demands the monolithic appearance of a block? Is it a matter of sound or an attempt to allow images to collide in a compressed space? I find my students are often, wondering whether a poem ought to be configured as lines or a block of text. And they can't always decide if the block conveys a particular sort of psychological temper that's very different, a little less spacious than lines, and collapses the musical element of the line. I mean, your poem is so lively and almost, I mean, there's almost a kind of claustrophobic intensity to the collision of images. But I would love to know if you have an algorithm. You probably, that's a stupid thing to say, but if you can talk us through how you come to decisions like that.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for that, Michael. I mean, I feel like your question was a poem in itself. I love these words. It's like I'm a collector of words too. It's like first of all, I haven't heard the word algorithm in a long time. It's like that's the word actually. Or I'm looking here just kind of like the word density and texture is really great, because thinking about like poems as, like I was saying, like making like dumplings, like there's something about its felt presence, like the page feels very felt to me. But yeah, I was in that poem in particular, and I'm thinking about when we make these decisions as writers, trying to figure out the shape, like figuring out the form that we're going to have this thing, this being, like take kind of shape. It never comes naturally to me. It's not like the first thing I think about. I just go and write, and then I kind of have to take a step back and ask myself about these questions about breath, about air, about wanting this claustrophobia, how the fact that it had to be a long poem, like if this wasn't like, whatever, like couplets or something, it just couldn't be. And so it takes a while, but I think for me, it had a lot to do with like, wanting that feeling of just like exhaustion. Like I couldn't, like the line itself, it just wouldn't let you go. Like there was no break, there was no breath, except for there were dashes, like in these kind of long lines that kind of acted a little bit like line breaks in my mind, because I still wanted there to be some rhythm, some meter to it in kind of thinking about that. And so it was kind of my like compromise was like, okay, I'll have little dashes or kind of like something to keep the rhythm going, which is so tied to labor, because you're constantly being watched, honestly, for like, like how fast you move, how you must move forward. There was this kind of forward momentum, as well as that claustrophobia. So it was like I said, like I think it's funny because I think of this poem in its very dense form, in the way it looks on the page with these long lines in the block. But I also, like I said, I get exhausted by it actually. So I've actually tried to reform the poem like in different ways, like the dumplings, or literally cutting up lines and fluffing them into the air, because it exhausts me. Like I love the idea of that a form can be what it needs to be, for its kind of like experience, but that as a poet, I can change that if I want to. Like I was thinking about the poem after preparing the altar, and that is a poem on the page, but then putting it into bowls on the table was totally different. And it had a the exhibition house had a chandelier of like plastic thank you bags above it. And so that changed, the poem was like something completely else. Like if anything, the I've learned over just in the past few years, just kind of like I felt, sometimes the page is limiting to me, and I need to literally do something. And I have also read poems while like peeling fruit. Like sometimes it's nice to kind of like do something else while I'm reading. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm thinking a lot about texture, like felt. Like I want to feel the poem. I want it to feel a certain way. And so that's how I make my decisions, I think, when I am thinking about form. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you for the remarkable suggestion of trimming beans with scissors. I never thought of that. Would save.
Yes,
That's brilliant.
it saves so much time.
Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, they're known as meat scissors, right? Like those kitchen shears of sorts, but like you can cut anything. Sorry, I keep doing this now.
One last thing. I'd love to know how you fill the inflatable bathtub. I'm
Oh, yeah.
okay.
You
That's it.
just you just you put it into the shower, and so it's kind of like you have this kind of, don't put it anywhere else. I mean, I feel like you would flood out your house or something, but that's what I do, and I just sit there. I mean, it's hilarious too, because it's supposed to say, it was like it was cheap, and it was like whatever, and it's supposed to say persist, which is kind of cheesy, like on the tub, but it's missing a T, so it just says persist, which is like perfect for COVID, perfect for this silly inflatable tub, persist. And now my friends and I just text each other, persist, persist. Like, anyway, this tub is great. It's like it's like laughable. It's also breaking down currently right now. So like it's actually flopped on one side because the stabilizer has fallen out. So I'm still using it. I'm grateful for spring and summer so I can like let go of my persist tub. But yes, now I'm just rambling. So thank you.
Well, that was wonderful. So maybe you could read us another poem at this point, unless somebody wants to jump in with another question. I can't believe that nobody out there is saying, "What do your poems taste like?" But I'm not going to ask that question for you. Somebody else has to take that one. Okay, go ahead.
Could I just wanted to come and say like thank you. I feel like I rarely read poetry that like addresses like labor in this way and like was like really impactful. So just like thank you. I don't know. I feel like that's sort of rare sometimes to like really be emotionally like, oh, this is about work. Like I'm reading something about work that's like art and I can feel it like happening inside of me. So yeah, really cool. And just all of the different kinds of labor that you bring up here and like literal like childbirth labor even at the end. Just
Thank
great.
you so
So
much for
yeah, just
that.
thank you. It was really great.
Yeah, it's actually something that you know, I mean, I want there to be more work on work, right? Like I teach this class called Poetry Class and Labor, and I was thinking a lot about kind of, you know, I mean, in that there's also songs. Like I was thinking about Dolly Parton's 9 to 5, and Bruce Springsteen's The Factory, or even thinking about Upward Mobility and Biggie and Juicy, for instance. But I was just thinking a lot about like, oh, there's so much, like we don't like to talk about work, we just do it. And I think that itself is something troubling, right? And thinking about kind of like work is so tied to the like literally our bodies. And I watched my mother go through so much, and she, at working night shift, she has vertigo, and it's like when your equilibrium is just like flopped over, it's a lot. And so and so much of my life is tied to this idea of labor, so much labor put into the next generation so they don't have to labor. And it's interesting thinking about that too. Like it's complicated, but it's something that I feel like, again, yeah, like you're right, I feel like I want more people to talk about work, and work is not just quit your job, right? Like it's so much else. And so yeah, I'm constantly thinking about labor. But thank you for that comment. Yeah, Jenny.
First of all, thank you, Jane. That was just spectacular. And I loved hearing you, before you read the poem, talk through the differences and the varieties and maybe even the hierarchies of labor, the most precarious labor being, that manual labor and that of essential workers. I'm also fascinated by this act of making dumplings out of your poems and ingesting them, because for me, that's translating one kind of labor, the writing of a poem, into something else, maybe more connected to the kinds of labor that are familiar in other family, for other family members. So, can you speak a little bit to what does writing feel like labor for you, and when? And also, like, what are some of these other strategies you take on, and you've talked about some of them, to make writing feel more laborious or embodied for you?
I love that question, Jenny. That's, ooh, talk about ooh, is like writing labor. That's I mean, I want to say yes, obviously, because it is my time, it is my energy, it is, something that should be. This is the other thing, is like when talking about labor, there's a lot of questions around value, right? Or like what is valued as labor. And oftentimes, obviously, writing is not valued as labor, right? Or even thinking about the idea of like not paying writers, and what is paid work, what is not paid work. But I also think back to kind of, when people say, I so enjoy your work, it is kind of strange to think about my poems as work too, because it is something that is in some ways outside of that. Like sometimes, honestly, some of my poems feel like it's not me. Like, I know that's bizarre to say, like I did write these poems, but especially when I write in the persona of my mother, and when I write in the persona, the poem where my ancestors, my ghosts speak, who passed away during the Great Leap Forward. I don't even know, it's not really even my labor. It's like I feel like they're just kind of talking to me. And so it's a complicated question, Jenny. I feel like I don't know how to kind of think about that, because it is something that I want people to see, to make it visible that this is labor. But at the same time, it's like it is, it's interesting thinking about, like, we oftentimes think of labor as something that's not enjoyable. And so, I mean, I guess there's layers there, I think. And I think my family it's really interesting too, because my family, in many ways, I'm kind of lucky to some degree, because my family, they don't read my work, or they don't encounter it because of a language barrier, just because they just think I'm that weird person who's like doing creative things, but they don't engage it. And so, like, they don't think of that as any part of my work, or any. They just know I'm a professor, and that's my job, and that is what I do. But when they went to go see the Fry art show, this is different, because they can actually walk into a room. They don't have to read anything. And that was emotional. They actually cried. They were like, I had no idea this is what you do. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Couldn't say yes either. I was like, yes, I think I did this, but
Wow.
it's odd. I know that was like a really messy answer, but maybe also, I think I found, Jenny, like I feel like I can screen share it. The images from when I did cook the poem, or tried to.
Please share.
So let me see if I can open the PowerPoint in the meantime. But thank you for that question. It's still opening. So this is when we play the elevator music of like waiting for my computer not to be slow. But yeah, okay.
Thank you for that, Jane. And I'm also so interested in, what is legible as labor to others, right? And I also know of family members who see writing as a job only when it comes with it, health insurance and a salary.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. Which makes kind of caretaking, especially that labor, oftentimes like not visible. Yeah, thank you for that. yeah, maybe it's taking a while to open up for some reason, which is fine. Maybe it's just the Zoom
Mhm.
tech weirdness, but I'm happy.
Mary,
Oh wait, now it's working. Okay, 1 second. Bear with me, everyone. Here it is. Okay. So this is when I made it. Well, this is when I cut up the poem into tiny little pieces because it was so dense. I wanted some air. And so you can kind of see, let me see if I can, you can kind of see I was just kind of gluing it there. And so it turns into this like pasta like curls. I don't know, but I just really like that now it had air. And then here are my words in rice paper, some of the words from my poem, like lineage, ginger, and I actually, I couldn't cut the whole, like a bunch of lines because it was too much. My X-Acto knife kept breaking because rice paper is actually really, really delicate. And so, but you can kind of see it. It's kind of what I did. And then here are the dumplings. So I just basically, I took some letters and then I already had made a mix of, I think it was like pork and shrimp, just a very traditional kind of like dumpling mix. And they're more like wontons, fried kind of wontons, but that's basically it. And there's some fruit in there. It was delicious. I ate it actually after I read, I wasn't the last reader, so luckily there were a couple people after me. So as they were reading, I was just eating it. So that's that. Yeah. I guess I could read one more poem. Let me see. Is that okay? I'm sure there's maybe other questions, but I'm happy to read another poem.
I see Mary has a question.
Oh yes, Mary.
Oh, yes, if appropriate, because of course I'd much rather hear you read another poem than answer my question. But I was thinking about this business of labor, Jane, and I know I recall you to be a very industrious individual, and obviously your great accomplishments make that evident. And I know it's in some ways, from what I recall you telling me, an inherited industriousness, but in a particular way, I think it would be very useful for the students to know what it's like to be so admirably driven, not only to be, am I right, an associate professor already at such a tender age, my goodness gracious, but also to have chosen to pursue not only several genres, but also scholarship as well as creative writing, right? So, I mean, the idea of so many times we, and I myself recall having to choose between, would I go for a doctorate? Would I go for an MFA? You've done it all. Like, part of that is because you are, just have so much intelligence and ambition and everything, that's so admirable. But could you talk a little bit about why you yourself felt the necessity to pursue both these paths?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mary. You're so kind. Your question really makes me think about, I will say this, when I applied for tenure, and you have to literally tell like everything you've done, like everything, every reading, and to go back into the giant, massive, like background of my journey, I was actually angry. I was really mad. I was shocked by how angry I was when I was applying for tenure, because I finally realized, that I didn't have to do much of this. Like, I was like, I didn't have to prove myself this hard. I didn't have to have all these publications. I didn't have to do any of this stuff. I could have just written and have like, it was a reminder that I lost track for a moment of like little baby Jane and just wanting to just create. And then I got caught up in just kind of like this constant pressure to be like the like do the most of everything. And I think that has to do with being first generation college graduate, and first in my family to graduate from college, so yay Bard. First to graduate high school, actually, and obviously first to get my doctorate, etc. And so there was a lot of pressure, but there wasn't at the same time. My parents never really gave me any pressure, because they were just like, as long as you can feed yourself, eventually you're cool, like it's fine. And so they actually didn't understand what a PhD was. They didn't understand like, why I was still in school. To be honest, they're like, didn't you finish college? Like, why are you still like in college? And I was like, no, I don't. So it was odd. Like I felt like there was this kind of I guess voracious curiosity I've always had as a kid. My brother is not, hates school, didn't really, I mean, he, eventually, I think he eventually finished college, but it took him about like 8 years. But I think that for me, it was just in terms of like going into different genres, different art spaces. Like I always thought to myself, it's as long as we can kind of think outside of what the confines of what genre are, of what creating something is, like I always felt more open and happy and free. And at the end of the day, I just wanted to be happy. And I think that choosing, like, diving into, I did my PhD in like basically Asian American literature. And so that was my own personal, I wanted to know more about the literature, my literature lineage. And I had to take that opportunity. And it feels like such a gift. But I do want to speak to kind of that exhaustion of production and exhaustion of kind of like trying to who is this for? I guess the question I'm always asking nowadays after my angry tenure kind of moment was like, who is this for? Is this for me? Or is this for someone else? And so I just ask, I mean, I think of all of you as writers, it's like, who is this for? And like, is this for yourself, and is it for the younger version of you too? And so I think, Mary, your question is so beautiful because it really asks me to self-reflect in such a way that's like, after I've done all this stuff, I'm always just kind of like, okay, like maybe I get to be lazy, like maybe I don't have to write, maybe a soup is a poem, like maybe I could just make a soup and just like be happy making a soup, and like that in itself is creating something quite beautiful. And then but I am a little bit of a nerd, I should say that. I am a nerd though too. I can't help but like get like really into things. Like I'm like, oh, I can really get into like learning about mushrooms. I sure can, like, or alpacas and why they pronk. Like I just am curious. I just love the word pronk. Why do they pronk? Actually, they pronk. Somebody told me that the alpacas pronk because they just they need to keep warm, so they keep just like pronk in the air. They like jump. Maybe that's wrong. I'm also fed a lot of wrong information often. Anyway, I hope that answers your question, Mary. It set me down. Like, I will tell you that I don't know if I'm the first person to say I was angry during tenure, but when people are like, congratulations, I'm like, thank you. Like, oh, the institution made me do it. Like, anyway, that's me. I know it's silly, but thank you for that.
Thank you, Jane. That's just so inspiring, so interesting. Thank you.
It is so inspiring. And does everybody want to hear the definition of pronk?
Oh yes. Let's make it official. What's pronking?
In the air with an arched back and stiff legs, typically as a form of display or when threatened. I'd never even heard the word before, right? That's great.
I spent some time with alpacas this past weekend at Pronkin pastures. So where they just kind of run freely. And so, yeah, that was the other thing, is that they're either afraid or they're just like, I don't know, pronking for fun. I don't know, but it's a great word, isn't it? Pronking.
Great word.
Put that in a poem. Yeah.
I so want to hear you read some more. So everybody has to stop asking questions right now, please.
You're kind. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, maybe I'll read that poem that I feel like I keep, and you referred to it too, the after preparing the altar, the ghost feast feverishly. It's kind of it's meant to be a mouthful of sorts, kind of like I don't know. I like it too when words kind of get mishmashed together. It just sounds very pleasing to me. That's a very poetic term, mishmashed together. But yeah, this poem I wrote in just 1 hour. I still can't believe that happened. I was grading actually at a coffee shop with some friends, and I just had to stop grading, and I was like, I need to go, and I moved into the other room and wrote this poem in an hour, even though it's a poem that's been on my mind for so long. My second book has a long series called When You Died, and it's letters basically epistolary poems to my family members who passed away during the Great Leap Forward. And I knew because I was writing to them that they had to talk back to me. They had to speak to me at some point, and then this poem kind of came out. So yeah, and I don't, again, like, maybe I can pull up the images from the Fry shows so you can kind of see what it looks like visually when it's like reworked into an exhibition. But yeah, this is after preparing the altar, the ghosts feast feverishly, and here are my ghosts talking to me. It begins with a epigraph from the incredible Audre Lorde. Yeah, after preparing the altar, the ghosts feast feverishly. How hard it is to sleep in the middle of a life. Audre Lorde. We wake in the middle of a life hungry. We smear durian along our mouths, sing soft death a lullaby. Carcass breath, arrows of licked fingers, and the finest perfume. What is love if not rot? We wear the fruit's hull as a spiked crown, grinning in green armor. Death to the grub, fat in his milky shuffle. Death to the lawlessness of dirt. Death to mud and its false chocolate. To the bloated sun, we want to slice open and yoke all over the village. We want a sun-drenched slug feast, an omelet loosening its folds like hot jello. We want the marbled fat of steak and all its swirling pink galaxies. We want the drool, the gnash, the pluck of each corn kernel, raw and summer swell. Tears welling up, oil, order up, pickled cucumbers piled like logs for a fire, like fat limbs we pepper and succulent in. Order up, shrimp chips curling in a porcelain bowl like subway seats, grapes peeled from bitter bark, almost translucent, like eyes we would rather see. Little girl, what do you leave? Leaven in your sight. Death to the open eyes of the dying. Here, there are so many open eyes. We can't close each one. No, we did not say the steamed eye of a fish. No eyelids fluttering like no butterfly wings. No purple yam lips. We said eyes, still and resolute as a heartbreaker. Does this break your heart? Look, we don't want to be rude, but seconds, please. Want globes of oranges swallowed whole like a basketball, or Mars, or whatever planet is the most delicious. Slather Saturn, ferment Mercury, lap up its film of dusk, yuck sun, seconds, thirds, fourths, meat wool, a bouquet of chicken feet, a garden of melons, monstrous in their bowls, prune back nothing. We purr in this garden. We comb through berries and come out so blue, little girl. Lasso tofu, the rope slicing its belly clean. Deep fry a cloud so it tastes like bitter gourd, or your father leaving the exhaust of his car charred. Serenade a snake and slither its tongue into yours and bite. Love, what is love if not knotted in garlic? Child, we move through graves like eels, delicious, with our heads first, our mouths agape. Our teeth, little needles to stitch a factory of everything made in China. You ask, are you hungry? Hunger eats through the air like ozone. You ask, what does it mean to be rootless? Roots are good to use as toothpicks. You, how can you wake in the middle of a life? We shut and open our eyes like the sun shining on tossed pennies in a forgotten well, bald copper, blood, yu choi bolts into roses down here. While you were sleeping, we woke to the old leaves of your backyard shed and ate that. And then we ate one of your lost flip-flops too. In a future life, we saw rats overtake a supermarket with so much milk, we turned opaque. We wake to something boiling. We wake to wash dirt from lettuce, to blossom into your face, aphids along the lashes. Little girl, don't forget to take care of the chickens squawking in their mess and stench. Did our mouths buckle at the sight of you devouring slice after slice of pizza and the greasy box too? Does this frontier swoon for you? It's time to wake up. Wake the tapeworm who loves his home. Wake the ants. Let them do-si-do a spoonful of peanut butter. Tell us, little girl, are you hungry, awake, astonished enough? I feel like that should make you hungry, but like not for, I don't know, some delicious things, some not. Thank you for listening to that. I'm not sure if I have the Fry images. Oh, I wish I did. I'll stall and try to find them if anyone else has some other thoughts or words.
I can also, if you want to talk or read, I can look for it. If you want, I mean, I have the link to the site. Is that what you're looking for?
Oh, yeah, that one totally can work. Yeah, I feel like I have a few other images I could also show. Let's see.
That poem was extraordinary. I think though that when you say that it's so intense that I believe you that you wrote it in an hour, because it does feel a piece, right? But I also feel that in the writing world, there's always these myths of, the writer who sits down and composes their novel in a week or whatever, and that I want all of the students to forget that she said she wrote this in an hour, because you're not going to write this poem in an hour. A couple years or something like that. But I mean, you did say that you'd been thinking about it for a long time before this, right?
Yeah, that's never happened to me too.
You have to be grading papers simultaneously in order to write something like that. That's the other part of the story.
Yes, exactly. Like I felt kind of like almost honestly, it felt like my ancestors were kind of like, stop what you're doing. Like I was being told to just stop and just write it because I've been thinking about it for so long. It's very bizarre. I mean, maybe I'm a little woo-woo, but I was just like, they were bugging me. Like they were just like constantly like, we've been trying to have, Jane, like a giant party, like a feast for so long. Can you just write down the feast, please? And I just love that they just eat pizza boxes, flip-flops. They just kind of went wild. And there's a poem also in the second book called The Frontier. And the end of the poem, like, does this frontier swoon for you? Like, it's just this kind of thinking about, this question of like, was it worth it, right? To kind of come to the US to think through the failure of the American dream and just kind of, I don't know, it was a lot in that poem. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know I know where it came from, but also I'm just like, sometimes I'm like, I feel like my ghosts like have my back. They're just somewhere out there kind of, watching out for me. And yeah, thank you so much for that, Susan. I think, yeah, I just have the Fry site, so I can kind of, I don't know, this is no, this is just a baby picture of me. It has nothing to do with art. But okay, I don't know if I can pause that, but you can kind of see the bowls here, and this is kind of the giant table. In the background, if you can see in that back area, there was a giant neon sign basically that translates to "Have you eaten yet?" which is just to say, how are you? That's just how you greet, people on the phone. So I'll just stop share there, but it was so fun. It was so fun to create like an exhibit, like turn a poem into like a sculptural piece was so fun. And I had so many ideas that never came to fruition. I wanted a giant noodle. I know that, I mean, like, and they're just like, no, like it's gonna rot. Like, or, those inflatable, now they have like, inflatable like pizzas, or you're sitting in an inflatable swan, like on the water. And the Fry Art Museum has this beautiful water like fountain right when you enter. And I was like, I want a giant inflatable pork bun, like a char siu bao, just like sitting there. And they're like, no. So I will just say, like, I am so grateful for my curation team who kind of talked me, like, they're just like, let's talk about what you might envision for the show, since you're a poet and you've never done anything like this. And they're just like, no, they're just like, what? You want a 10-foot lucky cat? No, you can't. What are you doing? Like, they're like, we have a budget. I was like, but the 10-foot lucky cat, like, please. No. So I keep thinking like the rejects from that show, I just want to create one day. Like, I would love to make an inflatable char siu bao in a fountain. I just really would.
That's great. I know there's going to be more questions, but we have about 10 minutes left, and I need to hear you read everything.
The poem, everything. Sorry. I was like,
oh, no. You don't have to read everything, but the poem, everything. As I was reading through your work, I was thinking, I want to hear you read this. So maybe read us one final poem, and then questions. I know that you had this idea of writing together.
Oh yes, in my dreams, yes.
In your dreams. It was a great dream, but maybe after you could tell us what you were thinking of writing. You could give us some prompts, and some of us might write and share in other contexts. Yeah.
That's a great idea, Susan. Yeah, I can kind of give you like a little, take home kind of writing if you wanted to do an exercise.
That'd be great.
And thank you for the shout out for the poem, Everything. For a moment, I was like, read everything. Like, oh my God, like what time did we say this goes to? But no, that's funny. The
Talk
title,
about labor.
right? Speaking of labor, yeah, it's like just keep going, Jane, till it's nighttime over here. But oh yeah, the title of the poem Everything, which is a poem that really kind of kicks off the second book, comes from one of my poet friends, Chen, who I love. Chen has this poem called Poem in Noisy Mouthfuls. And at the end of the poem, he basically, I'm paraphrasing, but just says like, like, I write about everything. And I just love that kind of like, this like in the poem, it's kind of like, oh, like this person only writes about these things, but it's like, what does it mean to write about everything? And so I was also thinking about the title of my book is How to Not Be Afraid of Everything. And then I was like, what is everything? And then just like, so I wrote everything. So thanks for the shout out for everything. Okay, here goes. I can't really read the parts that are in Chinese for reasons that like I can't speak Chinese, so like or like I can't read like Chinese. But in my dreams, this is very odd, but like in my dreams, like I can read and speak and I can speak fluently Cantonese. So it's very confusing, but I can't in real life. That's a long story. Okay, so I'll just leave out the parts in Chinese. Everything. I am the type to go to bed with my feet dirty. A man calling from a balcony is not to be trusted. In 1988, the nation sings a song I can't understand, but I sing it because everyone looks at me like I'm a thief and no one likes a thief. Algae gather in plastic cups along the Jersey shore. The dull prongs of a fork still count as a weapon. I gather plastic cups along the shore and shake them out to use for tea, juice, a home for my toothbrush. The Pledge of Allegiance is a building ledge, an alleged crime, a leg crossed over another leg, a plea gone askew, a glance shared in the room with someone else who looks exactly like you. Hundreds of toxic wild boars are roaming across northern Japan, and it would be a mistake to identify with them. In 1960, my grandmother holds no knife in no tall wheat. When washing her feet, my grandmother tells me she spent decades without shoes, wonders if the mud misses her. When we look at each other, we also look away knowingly. I am a good daughter, and I can repeat this indefinitely without ever taking a breath. Often, I call out to myself just to hear an echo, to hear something moving in the walls like a healthy family of rats. My mother has been told repeatedly, you cannot walk here. Here is a white stone, a white fence, a white seagull, a white jug of milk, a white candle, a white duvet, a white patio, a white bar of soap to wash your mouth out. Sometimes I dream in Cantonese and I have no idea what is being said. You grow to love what you create, pouring out of your mouth. In 1988, my father sees his reflection in a rearview mirror and identifies with the blood moon lighting his way to Atlantic City. From a balcony, a man yells at me, "You need some white dick," and I turn into a boar. My father disappears for weeks, and my mother keeps weeding the garden, pulling cigarettes from the splintering tomatoes I will devour. I study asymptotes for months and dream in curves, almost but never touching. My mother writes in her English diary for night school, I hate him, I hate him, I hate him, I. And her ESL teacher gives her a check, so I give her a check plus. To be a good daughter means to carry everything with you at all times, the luggage of the past lifted to the mouth. When we look at each other, my mother laughs like an overripe tomato on a windowsill. In 1989, I spent months assembling a puzzle map of the United States of America, and the teacher said, "Good job, Jane." And then louder and slower, like a drowning sloth, "Good job, Jane." And I did not touch a single piece. Bloody drunk on a blood moon, my father fights with another gambler and jabs at his arm with a dull fork, and they laugh celestially. During elementary school, I did not say a single word, not even when called upon, and thus the teachers and administrators decided I could not speak English because they looked at me. Mao Zedong explains math. In geometry, I just drew a picture of an egg. That was enough geometry for me. My grandfather was jailed by the Red Army sometime between 1966 and 1976, and my mother says, I saw him cry when I tried to visit. He wanted to eat the bao I made for him. Algae gather, gleaming like jewels on the head of my 5th grade betta fish. Counter-revolutionaries during the Cultural Revolutions are likened to finding a bone inside an egg. I was born healthy in the year of the rat. The man on the balcony invests in a foldable set of 2 chairs and 1 table in eggshell white, mold resistant, perfect for outdoor use. I was 10 when I willed a rock to fall off a ledge just by staring at it long enough. That's everything. The poem is written in these kind of like just standalone lines. They seem like they're standalone. And I was thinking back to childhood, you know, when you're in grade school and they make you do those like vocabulary quizzes where you have to draw a line from, oh, this word, it's connected to this thing, or like this thing is connected to that thing, and you had to do that. And so this poem actually, you can do that. You can like, oh, the algae goes over to this line that has the algae, and this one has a blood moon, so this one goes there. And so it has this kind of like a worksheet. You can kind of play with it. That's when I was writing it, I was like drawing these lines across lines, like so, which is everything, right? Everything's connected. So thanks for listening.
I felt like that was the way I was listening to as I was seeing, you know, making those connections. It was just such a great experience. But I also feel like it's a word that's appeared in your poems. I'm not sure if it's in this one, but the word heartbreaking. And I feel again and again, there are these moments. I mean, I see people laughing in our room here as well. But I felt again and again, you know, this sort of physical sense of heartbreak at certain lines, and sort of the movement here is just, it's so exquisite. I mean, it's just been absolutely marvelous to hear you read these. So, I mean, I had some of that sense reading them to myself, but hearing you, it sort of takes it to really another level. So it's just been so beautiful, you know. We have 1 minute left here. And Michael would like to say that was an amazing last line.
Oh, thank you. Thanks everyone so much for just being
but
such a generous audience too. It means a
would
lot.
would you like to tell us what writing prompts you were going to give us, or do you not have the time for that?
You know, I can try my best to describe it. Maybe the short version of it. It's actually an exercise that my friend and poet Michelle Peñalosa, you know, did for one of my classes, and it's kind of like a reworking of an exercise she's done. And it's you know, since so much of my work also thinks through like altar spaces and ancestors and ghosts, and it's kind of basically what you'll do is like, if you on a piece of paper, if you have QA, 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 like a question, and then answer, a question and answer a few times, but you leave your question empty, basically. And so all the questions are empty. And then the answer, for the first answer, you would write down a list of your comfort foods or describe your comfort foods, like have it be spaghetti meatballs, have it be like, I don't know, like sour gummies or whatever, like a list of that. And then the second answer, or the second A, was going to be you kind of taking kind of like the idea of water, or like thinking about sensory details related to water, including what it tastes like, what it smells like, what it feels like, just water. The third one, the answer, was thinking about the word community, which is like a big word of sorts, but if you were to think about it as a metaphor, like what could community, what is community for you, metaphoric or as a metaphor? You know, like, you know, is it that hot pot that's boiling with like over boiled like greens that you're just like, I shouldn't eat those greens at the bottom of the hot pot, they're kind of, you know, like what is community? Hot pot. And then so you have these three answers, these three little like lines, so to speak. And then I ask people to basically think about your own ancestors, think about those who have passed, you know, have it be family members, but also loved ones, friends too. And I want you to kind of think about kind of like, you know, what questions you would like to ask them. In other words, like, you know, I had one student tell me once, like, I wanted to ask them, you know, like, you know, are you warm where you are, wherever you are you warm? And they wrote that in the question, but you can put your questions anywhere, since you're now filling it out. So for instance, if you wrote like, are you warm where you are? And then you have a list of comfort foods, like in the first answer, that's so beautiful. It's like it's kind of like a conversation, but not really. Or if the question is kind of like, you know, I remember one of my students had a question, which is like, are you proud of me? To ask their ancestors, like, are you proud of me? And they had it in the water area. They put it in the second one. So what I think is really cool about this exercise, again, like, you know, props to Michelle Peñalosa as well, is this kind of like loosening of kind of like these sensory memories, but also like it's kind of like a type of invocation, or I don't know. I'm always trying to think about ways to communicate, you know, that deep love and affection I have to my family that's no longer here. And anyway, it always creates surprising textures and conversations when I do this exercise. So if anyone wants to do it, have fun with it. It is surprising what comes up, and the questions you really want answered or you want to ask too. So yeah, I just it's been a total joy. I feel like just full of energy and like vitality, and now I'm just like, I mentioned inflatable things like way too many times, like this talk too, between like a inflatable bath and inflatable chasu bao, but yeah, it's such a joy. Thank you all so much for being here, and again, thank you to Jenny and Susan for inviting me. And yeah, it's just, yeah, Celia, it's so great, and Mary, and Michael, and it's just a joy. And for all of you who I haven't gotten to meet in person, just, you know, feel free to reach out and say hi. I'm always glad to hear from you know, current and, you know, former Bardians as well. It's just really nice. So
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, for your words, for your generosity of your poems. It's been a wonderful evening. So thank you so much.
yeah, of course. And I wish you all, I'm so excited for your senior projects, and just like,
Now
it's
go
just,
write them.
yeah, right. And sometimes maybe you just have to kind of like literally cut it up. I don't know, or bake it or something. But sometimes it helps to jostle oneself out of one's comfort level to kind of come back to it of sorts. But I'm thrilled to know that you all are writing, and yeah, just in a lot of gratitude and community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thank you.